Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by DeechWorks Fuel Systems. Visit DeechWorks.com to fuel your passion. I'm your host, Con John Turk, and on this episode, we're going to talk about the current state of grassroots racing and track days. Joining me, former track manager of Summit Point, Hyperfest announcer. He's been inside the industry looking out. He's been outside the industry looking in. But at heart, he's a motorsports enthusiast. Ed Pardue, welcome to the show.
Con, thank you so much. Delighted to be a part and delighted to talk about this particular subject because it's important for the future of what we all love. So it's good to have just sort of a frank conversation of what is the state of grassroots motorsports, and then what can we all do as different stakeholders to be sure, we're doing this 20, 30 years from now. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. As an end user, as a racer, somebody who went through the traditional HPDE ladder and now is racing, we sink more money than we like to admit sometimes into vehicles, and they end up being in a particular class. And so if you don't want to waste that and you want to race for a long time, we have to, as a group, everyone that's associated with a racetrack, the organization and the racers in general, the folks that are attending, we all have to, this has to be somewhere in our train of thought. So I'm happy to have you on and talk about this. Before we get too deep into it, let's cover your background and what sort of got you that motorsports passion.
Absolutely. So my professional background was 30 years in radio, television, sales, and management, but always was involved in motorsports on kind of on the periphery of my quote unquote real job. My family's background actually goes back to stock car racing all the way back in the 1950s. My uncle, in fact, we just went to Charlotte a couple weeks ago to celebrate the 60th anniversary of my uncle on the pole for the NASCAR World 600. Then my dad became just a, weekend short track racer. But during that same time, especially when VIR reopened, we were every year at VIR, taking the camper down there, before it was IMSA, it was the Rolex series, and going down there simply as spectators. As you talked about being a driver end user. I was a spectator end user for many, many years. First time I went to Summit Point was in the late 1970s because a lady who worked at my elementary school, her husband was a club racer and gave all the kids tickets to come up there. So back in about 2014, I left the world of full-time media and went into the world of track management. Started with Dominion Raceway in Virginia, and then to Summit. I was at Summit from 2019 to 2023. And since then, I've been doing some one-offs, event coverage, doing some consulting with a couple of groups, but still very much with hands in the motorsports world.
Yeah. So I missed this. This is how wide a spectrum, and I'm glad you brought this up. And I forget these because, well, one, I haven't seen the pictures in a couple months, but in the Summit Point, Shea Summit has pictures up and there's grandstands and people are watching, and it's just club racing basically.
Yeah.
We only see that at Hyperfest. I know you were there this year. But generally you'll see that at Grid Life festival events. Yeah. You'll see it at Hyperfest, but the regular club weekend, we don't see spectators anymore.
You don't. One thing that's changed a lot, and I've seen this in both the circle track world, the road course world, and that kind of stuff, is the gap between the club racer and the professional racer. That gap has gotten so huge. So years ago, you would go to Let's talk about your local NASCAR short track. You'd go to your local little short track, and there'd be guys racing there who just a few weeks ago were at the Daytona 500. Same thing. You'd go to Summit, or you would go to another road course, and the guys who are there racing on a SCCA weekend back then or whatever had just come from 12 hours of Sebring. The gap between that club racer, that grassroots racer, and the pro level was so much smaller, and those worlds were kind of more intertwined. And I think that drove a lot of the spectator action. Now that gap has gotten so huge that you don't have as much of that crossover. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just a factual statement of the gap between the two. One area that has done a very, very good job with making that gap smaller is the drag racing world. So you go to a weekend sportsman race, and they're going to race on the front end of the NHRA or PDRA pros coming in later. So drag racing still does a very good job of narrowing the gap between the club, grassroots racer, and the pro. And I think that's why it helps draw some fans. Again, not good or bad, but just simply a factual statement of where that industry is.
Yeah. My buddy Jason drug me to Hagerstown Speedway a couple years ago. We watched some, and I think Kyle Larson was there racing. So even in the circle track world, the pros still slum it with us from time to time, right?
Yeah, that's just a perfect example. I think it helps to bring the I don't want to say casual fan. It helps bring the non-diehard fan out there. Like, oh, I've seen that gal on TV. I'm going to go out. But it's one thing that's changed a little bit through the years.
Yeah, it definitely has. It's a challenge, right? So the other thing that I believe is a challenge, and maybe playing a mix into this a little bit, is you say TV. Well, we're living in the transition from antenna and cable TV to streaming services. We are
absolutely
living in the boom of social media, right? So these pros are scrambling to get social media presences where there are influencers already in those spaces, right?
Well, and kind of the people who are killing it right now in motorsports on that social media side is you talked about Hyperfest and Grid Life and the drift world. Those people are way ahead of the curve. And part of that's based on the demographics that they're trying to attract, but they're way ahead of the curve. And, you go to one of those types of event, you go to a US drift event, or you go to a Hyperfest or whatever, there's a bunch of them, but it's almost like the whole weekend is a production event for that post-production piece that then millions of people are going to consume. And so then what happens is the people who are the advertisers see these millions of people consuming that product, and then it helps feed it back in. So that segment is particularly ahead of the curve on using exactly what you're talking, that different type of broadcasting to turn it into an economic model. We can put anything we want on a streaming platform or whatever, but if it doesn't help you as one of the stakeholders for your economic model to make it work, then it's wasted time and money.
For sure. And one of the reasons I think they do so well is the attention span shift kind of thing to the short videos, and their product is always first off, they put 30 cameras on their drift cars.
Right.
So they kept every angle. They didn't accidentally do that. They do that on purpose, right?
Exactly.
So the more the merrier. And then if they snip a section that's really close, and exciting, and it's semi-risky, right? So the kids go drift in the streets, which you shouldn't go do, kids, but you do, and you go bang up your stuff real bad. Well, they're doing it and not banging up stuff real bad, usually, right? So they're doing something sort of risque, exciting, flashy, tire smoke, loud noises, V8s, all that stuff, turbos and superchargers, and, they have tires that make different colors and make different scents and do these weird things, right? They're really playing this show up, and they're doing a great job marketing it.
They do. They're like I said, they're the poster kids right now for how to do it right.
Correct. But I don't want to say they're a small segment, because they're everywhere, right? They rent out the local speedways to have practice days or have amateur days or training days. They wouldn't rent VIR full course, but they would rent Patriot, or they would rent Jefferson or Shenandoah. Well, I don't know if they would do Shenandoah, but I think they did once, but
they do. Yeah, they have. But Patriot, Patriot at VIR is the perfect example for that. But that's one example of a group that, so we talk about all the challenges in motorsports and growing it. That's one group that is growing. And I don't forget about the actual event they do. I know some diehard sports car racers that, they just can't stand it. Forget about what the product is. Concentrate on the way they're promoting their product and the way they're growing their product, and what can we take as different stakeholders in the industry and bring that to what we're doing. So don't worry about what the product is, but how are they marketing and promoting that product? That's the takeaway.
No, absolutely. Flashy cars, put a lot of cameras on your stuff, and be ready to mull through a lot of video to get good stuff. It's different for us. I had a submission for Move of the Month for NASA Speed News, and it was literally me dodging a competitor of mine, a spinning E30, and barely scraping by. Like there was no contact. I checked.
Right.
But there was no contact. But that was in a 40-minute race, and it was super exciting, but it was 5 seconds total between setup and execution, and out of a 40-minute race. So it's really difficult to get enough of that excitement for promotion in road racing.
It is.
So
go ahead.
Well, I mean, we need to try to mimic and use the same vehicles and promote our sport of road racing within the motorsports community. But at the same time, we have to understand the challenges that we're facing.
Well, and then one thing about it, there is nothing more exciting, and whether it's a cup race or whatever group it is, when there's a nice field of cars, and wherever you are, the pace car, you're at VIR, and the pace car's diving in pit road at Hog Pen, and the field is tight, and they're about to throw the green. That is still some really amazing, exciting stuff, and it's. I don't think there's a huge issue with the product, but it's more in explaining to people what the product is. And then again, going back into the fact that it's understanding, respecting what the racer is looking for out of and I don't want to say racer because that limits the category, but what the driver, the participant wants to look for out of this experience. What does the club or organization need out of this experience? And then what does the motorsports facility need out of this? And each of those stakeholders, their goals and needs are obviously a little bit different. But I think having sort of a respect for what those are will be very, very helpful in the future. So my goal is, I got to make a profit for this facility. And I know that the club, if it's a not-for-profit club, they just need to pay their bills and end up at zero at the end of the year. And those participants need something cost-effective enough that they can do it 6, 8, 10 times a year. Because if we price them out, they're going to go away. So how do we balance those three stakeholders, participant, organizer, and track, to make it work for everybody? That's the challenge that I think we see going forward.
That's the huge challenge. And I'll tell you why. Obviously, the economy in general is not booming. some people will say it's lackluster. Some people will say it's really bad. Some people say it's okay, but it's definitely not booming, right? So we definitely see car counts going lower. There's more space. There's more elbow room in the paddock for road racers in grassroots motorsports, at least from my vantage point. But that hurts the organization's bottom line. Now, a totally different organization, and I won't name names just because, they're struggling, and they reached out to me to give me a discount code and try to promote things. And unfortunately, they're nowhere near me. So I can't even attend. It just wasn't a good match. Right. But in talking to the owner of the organization, they used to hold race series. They have time trial series. They do HPDE, and they are struggling to get a car count to even hold events these days.
And there may be a little bit when I look at, and this is one of those you said earlier, outside looking in. There might be a little bit of a glut right now in the numbers. So you've got two things. You've got the club model, you've got the for business model, and so maybe there is a little bit of glut. The sad part about that is I know every one of those people, and for each one of them, I hope their business continues to be successful. But there is, there is a point where you can only slice the pie up so many ways. And but my goal for them, and this is such a dumb old analogy, but the idea is not to cut the same pie into smaller pieces, but to try to make the pie bigger for everybody. And that's kind of what we're talking about here today, is what overall do all three of these stakeholder groups need to do to grow that overall participation.
Okay. So your background is mostly on the track side. So can we talk about considerations the tracks have to have and some of the challenges that they're facing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest one right now is labor. And that's not unique to any one or two tracks. A couple of years ago, I was out at Laguna Seca and meeting with those folks, and we were talking about having enough, EMS and EV workers and all that stuff. So I would say if there was a universal thing across the spectrum right now, it is labor, and not just labor. It's skilled labor. The folks who are on the corners, your corner workers, those are trained, skilled people. Your EV people, that is a learned, trained skill. Your folks who are on fire and ambo, that's trained skill. So one of the biggest challenges, and I've talked to several places about it, is labor, and labor is a challenge. And as the labor cost goes up, then those costs, because listen, a track is a business and it's got to make a profit to continue. As those labor costs go up, those labor costs get passed down to the clubs and organizations, and those get passed on down to the racer, which simply kind of elicits an even bigger challenge at the bottom end. But if I were to be asked what's the biggest thing, I would say labor is number one. Insurance is always a challenge and will continue to be, but that's a manageable one. It just continues to go up. And then three, of course, depending on where your facility is located, is the cost of land and your property. But those are the three. So as somebody who's getting in a car or an organization, you got to say, okay, what's the track operator trying to do? Track operator is trying to put enough people here to work to pull this event off. And that part is getting more expensive.
Oh, for sure. I've seen it at every track that I've gone to. I think part of the challenge is going to be the loss of expectations. Okay. So we, as the consumer, the end user, the racers, the spectators, I know Hyperfest was well staffed, but in general, things like trash service, or how often the bathrooms get cleaned, or soap gets refilled, or
Absolutely.
paper towels, that customer service aspect is what's going to take the hit. And I think, I don't know. I think the tracks need to maybe be a little more cognizant of that.
No, I think you're right. One thing I tried to do when I was at Summit was I tried to make myself really available. I would, when racing was over or whatever the event was during the day, I would take some time once the track went cold and walk through the paddock and simply try to hear back from folks of what they, how was their day, what we could do, what could we do to make their day better. You have to realize that your customer, as a track operator, your customer is not your enemy. Your customer is your lifeblood. For a long time, people kept using the country club model for the road courses, and that's still a pretty decent model. But it's also I think maybe like a ski resort is almost a better example, because people are there for fun and recreation, but they're there also for what are the other amenities you're providing. And different participants want different levels of amenities. There's some folks that want to come, they just want a nice paddock space. They want the electric to work, and they want to be able to cook out and grill and eat some burgers. Other people want those higher amenities. So that's based on the track you're going to. But I do think it's important to understand what the customer's expectations are. And if you can't meet that expectation, tell them, you know what, we can't do that. Hey, we want, I don't know, a new spectator deck. Well, we can't do that now, but thank you. And that's something we need to look at. But understand what their expectations are from that standpoint, and at least listen to them, and then be forthcoming and say, yep, you know what, that's a great idea. We can do that, but we can't do these other two. But every participant's a little bit different on what they want. The guy who is Spec Miata racer may be very different than the guy who's a VRG vintage racer who, brings the car out 3 or 4 times a year and it's worth, $7.1 million. So you also have to realize that their expectations may be very, very different.
Yeah. And we see that in the paddock, right? So you can look at people's rigs and you can tell their needs, right? So some people show up, all they need is the power to work, right?
Right.
They got that big old class, the tour bus RV with a nice trailer, everything is contained in their vehicle. They bring it, right? They bring everything but power. And some of them bring power too,
Some they bring their own power. Yep.
Right. Because they never know where they're going to get paddocked. So,
well, and as an operator, you just need to talk to them. You need to understand what it is, because they are, again, I love using ski resort better than country club. Ski resort, they're there. Yes, they are there to ski, but they're there to do so many other things as well. And it's the, what's going on in the, the chalet at the end of the night or something. So being cognizant of that, when some of the events, some of the SCCA events at Summit had pretty decent spectator turnout. And I would try to go over and chat with those folks. Okay, as somebody who's, a different type of stakeholder, what do you want? What are you looking for? And it's understanding what you can and can't provide and just being forthcoming about it.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and talk about, so you hinted to a lot of stuff here with the organizations. For-profit organizations, not-for-profit organizations, club models where they sort of like pool money and move things around. What do you think they need to be, or what are their challenges? And then what do they need to be cognizant of?
Absolutely. And each of those models can and do work. So I don't think there's one that works better than another. They're just a little bit different. And, I tell people when they would come to me and they said, hey, I'm thinking about getting involved in this. Which group should I join? I'm like, you should go to everybody's event at least once, and you're going to find somebody that matches better what you're doing. Some groups are obviously formed by the type of car, whether it's vintage or it's Porsche Club or BMW Club or whatever it is. Others are kind of done by the style of the events and the type of events they provide. I think for the organizations to understand what the challenges of the tracks are, but then also understanding how can I grow my bottom? I don't say bottom end. That's not the right thing, but how can I bring in my new people? How can I keep it as cost effective as I can? Some of the groups you see that are doing well with this is bringing in third-party marketing and advertising, so they can offset. So as tracks, facilities have to raise rates, as we talked about with labor and all that stuff. You can sort of control your registration fees by what can you do with third-party marketing, third-party advertisers that can help offset some of that. And I think you see clubs and groups doing a better job of that. Some clubs they don't have to be as cognizant of it because their clientele is a little bit different and the bottom line cost isn't as important. For some, getting back to what we're talking here, grassroots motorsports, they need to make that entry level as easy as possible, whether it's monetarily or whether it's also, there's sort of that thing of, how do I get involved in this thing? I think by using some outside marketing and advertising, not only to get the word out, but people being a part. I never use the word sponsorship. I just like the word advertising better. But for you selling advertising, now you're all setting your costs, and that goes straight to the bottom line, which helps you not charge that guy who, just bought a Miata from the neighbor and doesn't know how or what to do with it. It really allows him or her to come in at a much lower entry price and much later. It reduces the threshold.
Yeah, and you hinted at a couple other things that maybe we can expand upon, but neither one of us own an organization, so we probably can't speak too clearly on it. But you said getting new people in. So we have some organizations, historically, it was get your race license and race only. They're starting to change their model. There's other organizations like who I race with NASA. You start in HPD 1, High Performance Driver Education 1, and you work your way up. And then you either stay in group 3, go be an instructor in group 4, or you go to time trial or race. Yep. And so that there are different models out there, and all organizations are a little different. Some are HPDE only. Come out to the track, enjoy your time here at the track, run around the track with your buddies, put your video cameras in, and, just have a good day, So there's different models within that grassroots area.
And that's fantastic. I mean, there's some folks who don't even want to get to the HPDE level. They want to come out and they want to do autocross, and autocross might be all they ever do. And that person who's coming out to autocross is as important as anybody else. And they don't have to go, oh, well, autocross, now I got to move up here and move up there. No, if that's what you like doing, then do it. I don't think somebody who has gone through the HPDE ranks and they go, oh, man, now you really need to go to time trial. You don't have to. So I don't think – I understand the progression to build your race groups and all, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with coming out to the racetrack, running 2 morning sessions, 2 afternoon sessions, and then cooking out in the paddock and having a great weekend. That person is just as important who the guy who's running a GT3 car, in time trial and running all the race groups and all that stuff. They're both equally important. And how do you, as both an organization and a facility, cater to both of their needs?
Right. And that's the challenge that the facility and the organizer is going to have, right?
Yeah.
So
yes.
the demographic is so huge. The who could possibly be in your paddock is infinite, right? It's so but I feel like lately maybe they haven't taken that approach.
Right.
Not all of them. Some of them maybe, some of them not. It's a struggle in the paddock because you hear a lot of complaining. You hear a lot of, I can't make this event. It's just too expensive. I think we're on a precipice here.
Well, listen, cost is always going to be a huge part of it. One thing that organizations try to do is do what they can to control costs. The problem is, particularly racers. Same thing with HPDE and time travel, but particularly racers can be their own worst enemy, because anything, as an organization try to do to save some money, you immediately, your goal as a participant is to go as fast as you can, not necessarily save money, but at the same time, that pocketbook's going to run out at some point. So how do you balance that? I will tell you, the road racing world does a better job of it than the circle track world, mm-hmm. because of the way you can class cars and all of that stuff. But just the items to get to the track, gas, tires, those types of things, you don't, as an organization, have a whole lot of control over that. And then it's also talking, it's talking to participants and asking, what is it you want out of this weekend? I want to win 4 races. Okay. You over here, what's your goal out of this weekend? My best times, I've never been quicker than 126. I'd love to get into the 125s. Okay, that's your goal. And those are very, very different goals. And again, catering to both of them can be a challenge.
For sure. It's so many people to please all at one time from multiple angles. So everyone, the participants are who brings the cash flow in through the organization to the track, right? So through the organizer to the facility. And so there's a balancing act that everyone has to play. I have to balance my budget. The organization has to balance their budget, whether they're for profit or not for profit. And the facility has to do the same thing. And I think most of the issues are coming down to finances. We were almost okay being semi-stagnant as a growing, or I'd say stagnant. We weren't stagnant. Our fields were growing, just not at an exponential rate, just like a nice trickle in 20 new racers a year or so.
Right.
At least in my region. That seemed like it was doing okay. It was beating some of the attrition for a long, long time. But now I don't know if that's the case. I'm sure Chris is yelling at me right now, but.
Well, no, here's the thing though, is, so you can only get so much out of the current, even if you're growing. So the big thing is, how do I find additional revenue streams? So, is some of that, streaming events online? Is part of that signing up third-party marketing opportunities that do stuff? Are there opportunities away from the track? In other words, so let's say there's an organization that says, hey, if you're doing a special event, we can bring cars to it and put cars on display for events. So the one part is, if we've exhausted all of the revenue potential in one certain area, what are the other revenue streams? What are we missing out on? What are the other ways to take some of the burden away from the grassroots participant and share it somewhere else? Chris does a great job with bringing in, outside and third-party sponsors and all for some of his events. But how can we expand that? How can other groups do that? And, you don't want it at the cost of someone else, but what are those other revenue streams? Is it marketing and advertising? Is it adding additional events to your regular weekend? But I think it needs to be at least explored and looked at, because there's other things going on outside of the actual on-track activity that I think could be financially beneficial to organizers and clubs, and then eventually trickles back down to the grassroots participant.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem, so it's got to balance out. It's got to, it's got to be symbiotic and everyone has to play nice together. And so that's going to take time. It's going to take action on everybody's part. And if we could look in your crystal ball and see, do you think we're having a bad time right now? But is grassroots motorsports struggling, even if it's stagnant and not growing or barely growing? To me, we're going to see attrition. Some of our friends can't keep this up. Some of the organizations can't keep this up. And over the last 3 years, probably a dozen tracks have changed hands. So there's owners that can't keep this up.
Yeah, I think there's, everything that, when it comes to any type of economy, it is cyclical. I think, anytime you think it's the end, it probably isn't. But I just think it goes back to, well, like I say, this is a great example here. Simply having this type of conversation and bringing these subjects up, I think is a huge step in the right direction. Now, there's going to be somebody that listens to this and they go, dude, you're 100% wrong. What we need to do is this. And guess what? That's great, because it's instigating that conversation of what are the ideas? And somebody else may have a whole different take on this. They'll sit down and listen to this and go, you know what? I think they were totally off the mark. But you know what it should be is this. Wonderful. Let's engage and let's have that conversation in what's going on. But I go back to what I said earlier in the piece. There are some groups that are growing. Look at what they're doing and model it to where it fits what your organization or what your track is trying to do. But conversation is the best part of it. And again, that's why I spent so much time in the paddock. And I did the same thing when I was running another facility, is walking around in that paddock area and talking to people and have those conversations. And yeah, every now and then they'll tell me, oh, you know what? Can you go down there? The bathroom down there needs to be cleaned. Absolutely. Let me get the guys on the radio. Let's go clean a bathroom. That's as important as anything else. But, I would love for people to respond to this and go, hey, I think you're wrong. What we should do is this. Okay, let's have that conversation, because you may be right.
Yeah. I'll say this for every single episode that I put out. I'm here to invoke thought, because I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm not saying that my subject matter expert is absolutely right in everything they're saying, but we're both bringing a perspective and we're trying to have a conversation about the topic. And if you disagree with it and you want to engage, feel free to reach out to me, because I'll cover it in something else, or we'll have another conversation. But specifically with this topic, we need to all have more of these conversations. You and I are we're having this conversation. It's not going to impact anything,
Right. And there's more than one way to get to the right conclusion. So I think it's important. One other thing is trying to get the message out there. And this is strictly going to your point of seeing some attrition in the number of grassroots motorsports participants. Part of it is also getting the message out there of exactly what it is. I think there's a lot of people who have a misconception on what it is. And, it's somebody maybe doing a weekend video or something of, hey, you know what? This is what, we went up to pit race for this weekend event. This is what it actually looked like, so people understand. Because I think people maybe have a misconception of, what that is, especially people who are completely outside of that road racing world. And they're like, oh, so I need to go buy a Ferrari. And no, you're missing the whole point. So getting some of that information out where people understand what it is might have a beneficial piece to it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's where it falls to us racers. I think the racers have the biggest investment in time, energy, sometimes money. I've seen some HPDE rigs that are really, really crazy, right? Didn't need to be crazy, but they were. I've seen HPDE guys show up with crew to service their vehicle. So, but in general, we want the organizations to survive, and we want the tracks to survive, so we can keep going racing. And so, I as a racer, I feel like it's part of my duty to introduce the sport to the younger generations, to adults who are inquisitive, but anyone really,
Well,
yeah.
It comes to outreach, and I'll share the story with you. It'll give away how old I am. But 1977, I'm in elementary school in Northern Virginia. One of our teachers, her husband was a club racer. He brought his car to the elementary school. It was, one of those outdoor field days or whatever. He brought his car to the elementary school. The kids are like, "Oh, cool, it's a race car." He handed out some passes to the kids. We went home, and it's like, "Dad, I got this ticket. We got to go." And, we went to a road race in 1977, first time I'd been to one as a 10-year-old, because a guy brought his race car to the school. That's pretty basic grassroots, hand-to-hand marketing, but it sure did work.
Yeah. I think so. At least, so I do a lot of trunk or treat with my new race car. So we drag it everywhere, trying to get exposure in general. The trick is those types of trunk or treats happen in October. The new race schedule isn't out. I would love to be able to hand out hero cards with the next year's race schedule already on it, but it's not set, right? The business model for the track and the organizations, they're generally not set by October. So
it's tough. It's one thing I tried to do was try to get our schedule put together as soon as possible. But it is, if you remember that game of Jenga where you stacked up all the blocks and all, that's what it looks like putting together a schedule at a facility with multiple tracks and everything. It's a Jenga puzzle. But yeah, the earlier you can do it, the better. But just, that kind of hand to mouth marketing and advertising, it does work. The other thing and this goes more international, but one area where we fall down is we do not have great, and then nothing against like Woodbridge Karting and all those guys do a fantastic job. So it's not what they're doing, but when you look at karting in Europe and South America, you've got these 6-year-olds who are karting who are going to be that next generation of road racing. We don't have that here. And that's one area that I've always thought was missing, because now you're bringing them in at this very, very young age. The motorcycle folks do a pretty good job with some of their younger youth programs and everything.
Right.
But again, in Europe and South America, you've got this karting culture that's very, very different than what we have here. Woodbridge Kart, they do a wonderful job once the folks, and they've got their cadet series and all. So, how can they build on that? I think that's an opportunity of growth there for them. And part of their challenge is cost, just like everything else.
Yeah. As somebody who I spent a couple summers in Brazil, I raced karts while I was there just because it was there. And then having traveled in Europe, their kart tracks are way more frequent than ours.
Oh, yes. Yes.
They're kind of everywhere. And while we in the United States battle neighbors who fight the racetrack that's 100 years old because they moved in and they don't want to hear it. Like, these are challenges the tracks are facing outside of what we have to go through just to run events and stuff. Laguna's got the sound limitations. There is a quiet hour at Summit. There used to be, at least at noon or 11 to noon.
There still is at only on the Shenandoah. There's a Shenandoah 11 to 12, a quiet hour on the Shenandoah circuit. Yep.
Okay. So, and we still want to be good neighbors as track people. Okay. So we shouldn't be out on the roads hooning it up. We have a racetrack for that, those types of things. But we also have to balance that struggle, right? We're not going to get new karting spots. Karts can get kind of loud in a pack,
Yeah. And you go back to it. It is that balance. And again, understanding what each group is looking for out of it. When I kind of stand back now and look at it, there is, again, having that conversation, having that understanding, and what is your objective? I think from a track operator standpoint is understanding that, your participants, they are your guests. They have come into your quote unquote restaurant, and you need to be sure you're treating them like folks who've come in to have dinner at a nice restaurant. It doesn't mean you can give them everything. It doesn't mean that sometimes they don't present challenges that can cause issues, but understanding where they are as a customer is huge. And then knowing also that your clubs and your organizations and your for-profit groups are, they are as big a part of it. You take any of those three away and you fold. So I think there's an appreciation for it. I think sometimes in the industry, one group tends to take the other group for granted and go, they don't understand me and I don't understand them. And that's, again, goes back to conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's dust off the crystal ball. And where do you think grassroots motorsports will be, let's say 5 years from now, and then let's say 15 years from now?
Well, obviously, one of the challenges is going to be, especially the 15, is in 15 years, what is a car? So that's one of the first conversations of what is a car, and I think that as we see changes in the automotive industry, and this is a weird piece, I don't know if a lot of people agree with me on this, but I think as we see changes in the auto industry, it makes motorsports facilities even more valuable, because there may be a time where if you have a certain type of automobile, that a racetrack is the only place that you're able to go and race it. So I think that's one question, is what does an automobile look like in 15, 20 years? It's going to be, that change is going to be longer than anybody thinks it is. But I think if organizations and tracks do it properly, then they can kind of become these oases for these types of vehicles. And I think that's a positive. I always use the horse industry as a great example. No one rides a horse to work anymore, but look at the money spent every year in the horse industry. So I think that can be a positive. I think there is probably a bit of a glut in the industry right now with the number of different organizations and clubs and all that. And I say that with reservation because I know all of them, and there's nobody out there that I want to see go away. But I think there is a little bit of us, the lion eating its own babies kind of thing, because there is a bit of a glut there. I don't have an answer for it, because they're all good organizations. They're all good people. And I don't want to see anybody go away. But I do think there's a little bit of like going back to the pie thing, cutting the pie into many slices. Big challenge is going to be real estate and racetracks. And that's the part that I don't have an answer for. But that's going to be a big, big challenge, is real estate and racetracks. And then get to a point where, folks in the DC, Baltimore region are incredibly lucky. You can go to Pitt, you can go to New Jersey, you can go to Summit, you can go to VIR. You've got 4 facilities within a half day's drive. Well, if those all need to move out to the middle of Montana somewhere, that's going to be a challenge. But I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic because I think the challenges can be overcome, because I think there's such a passion for this. It's such a unique endeavor. Some people golf, some people ski, some people do boating, whatever. But this particular recreational piece is so unique that I think people will find a way to make it work. The answers aren't easy, but I think they're out there.
Yeah. And unfortunately, as I run this podcast, I get to know more and more people. And like you, the more people I meet, the less I want them to fail. But I feel like capitalism's still strong and things are going to shake out. And one of the biggest costs is we will lose tracks. Tracks will go away between the price issues, the real estate issues. They need to fight legal battles, so there's a price that they got to pay there. We will lose the tracks. I know we're blessed in the DC area, very blessed, but and Dominion's not that far away.
Right. Yeah.
For a track.
Well, and you got to look at what the options are too. So as a track operator, you've got to look at. So I've got this piece of property. What type of events make me more money? Is it motorsports or is it something else? And that will be a challenge as the years go on, where you're like, okay, I've quote unquote outpriced us for motorsports, but guess what? I'm going to make more money over here doing that. So that's a balance as well of where that whole cost structure is on keeping the revenue from motorsports high enough to where a track doesn't want to go do something else, but keeping it reasonable enough to where your grassroots participant can come out and be there. And so that's always, that's that tightrope.
Yeah, it's going to be a balancing act for all parties involved. So
agreed, but I wouldn't be.
I think it's more important now that we start.
But
that's why we need to communicate more.
Exactly. That's my thing. I wouldn't be pessimistic about where it is. I would be concerned. I would say there's serious conversations to be had, but I wouldn't be pessimistic. I would say, okay, what are the things that each one of these stakeholders can do to move it in the right direction? Like I said, I think you're doing a great service to the grassroots racer in simply having the conversation where people can discuss it. And I think if people continue to do that, then there's a good future on the horizon.
Well, I appreciate that. Where can people reach you if they'd like to reach out to you, if you want?
The easiest part is probably just on Facebook.
Okay.
Or I'm happy to share an email address, which is edwin.pardue@gmail.com. More than welcome to reach out there as well. But like I said, I'm doing some consulting right now. And this conversation I'm having with you, I've had with other facilities around the country. And it's, I guess the good news is, as a region or whatever, the problems are across the board, mm-hmm. which is kind of sounds bad, but it's also sort of good because you're like, okay, this is something we're all working with. Let's come up with a solution.
Then there was a rumor that I saw. Well, it's not a rumor. I'm going to start the rumor. You also sing. So we're both from the same hometown, Alexandria, Virginia. So are you in a band?
Singing would be a stretch.
Okay.
Singing would be a stretch. I can play like 4 chords on the guitar.
Uh-huh.
But I did have fun. It was, it's been, 2023. So VRG, Jefferson 500, Jim Karamanis, who runs that program, he has a band, and they did let me sneak on stage with them at the Jeff 500 last year. And that was a lot of fun. So, it's a fun hobby, but it's usually most of my grand performances are sitting on the front porch swing at the house with a guitar.
Oh, because you had a background picture that said you were at the Vienna Inn, and I love the chili dogs at the Vienna Inn. So,
I love them too. Those were that picture is a bunch of guys I used to do college radio with years ago, and yeah, the Vienna Inn is a tough chili dog to beat. That is one of the best.
all right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, reminiscing a little, and getting this conversation started in our community. You're doing it on the professional side. I kind of want to stoke the flames in the paddock. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, anytime. And if there's a follow-up conversation that we want to have sometime later, please let me know. I'd be happy to do it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.